Good day, citizens of the free world, from border to border, coast to coast, and to all the ships at sea. I bring you a warm welcome. This is your correspondent, Jim Tate, and thank you for tuning in to the Tate Chronicles. Join me as I cut through the fog that exists at the leading edge of healthcare technology. Come with me today and explore emerging technologies that hold the potential to bring beneficial disruption to healthcare. My guest today is Anthony Begando. Anthony is the CEO of Professional Credentials Exchange. They are focused on bringing change to the current process of documenting professional credentials. Anthony, welcome to the Tate Chronicles.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here.
You know, I'd like to hear, Anthony, if you don't mind, first a little bit about your background and how you first got involved in professional credentialing.
Well, you bet. So, you know, I think it's fair to say that I'm your quintessential serial entrepreneur. I've built and developed a number of businesses, typically focused in the software or the technology-enabled services space. And about 17 years ago or so, I was working running a management consulting firm, and we had a client who was in the locum tenens space, which is the temporary practitioner, contracting space. For example, if you need an ER doctor to work for you for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, locum tenens organizations provide those kinds of resources. So this particular organization was struggling on the revenue side in terms of being able to take orders from clients, but could not fulfill a large percentage of those orders. And when we peeled the onion back a little bit, it was very apparent to us that credentialing, meaning the process of gathering all the paperwork and documentation that one needs to review a healthcare practitioner's competency, that this credentialing process was their fundamental problem. So, we used some different CRM tools that were available at the time and some other technologies, and built for them a custom way of managing and automating that work process. Everything from gathering documents, communicating with all different parties, and really making sure that the process was as efficient as it could be, given its intrinsic, timeliness, right? So long story short, we built this solution out for the client, and it was a substantial success, and that project led to a number of follow-on projects, and ultimately are working with the military, with New York City Health and Hospitals Corporation, and several other large payers and large health systems here in the U.S. to, address the similar kind of fundamental problem. Our credentialing process is slow, or it's broken, or it's not reliable, and we want to leverage technology to make this a more efficient process. So that was my baptism into credentialing.
Sure. And so let's talk about actual current use case. So let's say a hospital or a practice starts in an area, and the providers of that practice want staff privileges at the local hospital. So would the hospital be the ones to do the credentialing process?
Yes, in that particular use case, yes, they would. And and here's how this would play out normally. Right, they would, go through the recruitment or the contracting process, whichever the case may be, with that hospital. And at the point where the hospital says, we want to work with this practitioner, right, this sort of thumbs up on going forward with the recruitment and or contracting process, there is about a 4 to 6 month long, delay in being able to establish that practitioner or those practitioners, working at that organization. And it's largely due to the time it takes to do the credentialing work and then enroll those practitioners with the payers who have contracts with that hospital.
Let me stop you right there, Anthony. That's a pretty shocking number. I was thinking you were going to say 4 to 6 weeks. You're saying 4 to 6 months. And so correct. What the credentialing staff at the hospital, what are they doing? Are they making phone calls to medical schools?
So at that point where they say, let's work together, they request a suite of documents from the practitioner or other information artifacts, whatever the case may be, and the credentialing staff goes through their CV, they go through the documentation that they provided, and then they collect other documentation that's needed to verify different parts of their professional profile, and then they primary source verify that information with the sources that provide it, whether it's a school or another employer or an insurance company, what have you. Part of the Joint Commission and NCQA et al. Accreditation requirements, require you to go out and make sure that these documents are accurate and they came from the source which they, are intended to be delivered from, right?
Sure.
So they go through that. I'm sorry, Jim, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was just going to stop you right there for a second because you're maybe or the credentialing people may be contacting, let's say, a medical school, and there has to be some verifiable documentation. Is that a letter? Is a phone call is documented? How is it actually documented?
Typically, it's some sort of physical artifact, like a letter, like a diploma-like document or something like that. But sometimes it is just a phone call that's been verified, to have happened between two parties, and a memorandum for full record is written up and signed off on by whoever made that phone call. We'll give you a great example. Let's say that there was a fellowship program in place in the 1990s, at a medical school that's no longer in place. Trying to get the people who are involved in that fellowship program, try to locate them, and then find the information about that, particular fellowship can be very challenging. FSMB, the Federation of State Medical Boards, sometimes maintains that information as sort of the steward after they close that program. But the information can be challenging to acquire, and this is one of the great example. One of the things that create this huge delay at times in doing this credentialing. I also, in all community too, I want to be very candid, very clear, frankly, on this process timeline, right? A good credentialing shop can get through 90% of the credentialing episodes that they need to perform in 3 or 4 weeks. Then it gets handed off to the appointment process, which takes, based on the schedule of board meetings at a particular organization and review processes, that may take anywhere from as little as a few weeks to a few months, just based on scheduling. Then the payer enrollment process is wholly driven by the schedules of the individual payers where they have contracts, right? Sure. So this 4 to 6 month time, I want to make very clear, is not the medical staff office at a hospital. It's a whole coordinated group of people that are organizations that need to get through this process in order to get a practitioner appointed to the clinical staff and then enrolled in the cognizant payers that are aligned with that hospital.
Sure. We talked about a hospital. Let's just talk about a practice. If a practice is hiring a new provider, do they have to go through the same process because of the contracts with the insurance companies and third-party reimbursers?
It depends. It depends on whether or how they're contracting with those payers, right? If they're part of a group, there might be one path that they take. If they're part of a network, there might be another path that they take. But ultimately, yes, that newly hired practitioner needs to be credentialed and enrolled with the payers that they're directly contracted with or through some other third-party affiliation.
And we've talked about this is really shuffling paperwork. It takes time because there are a lot of parties involved. What kind of cost is involved? Is it just whatever it costs for? Well,
so it can cost. Well, I'm sorry. In my experience from doing time and motion studies in hospitals and at payer sites, again, it varies based on the complexity and the specific rules that an organization may have about credentialing, because there are guidelines in the industry, but any organization can define anything that they want from a process perspective, right? And the cost for doing the work at a hospital can be as little as $300 or $400 to get that work done, or as much as $1,500 plus, right? Depending on how complicated and somebody's background is, right? Then the flip side, the follow-up to that is payer enrollment. And if you're a hospital that has, let's say, 20 different payer contracts and managed care contracts plus Medicare and Medicaid, every single one of those organizations needs to consume this credentialing data that you've gathered, in their forms and substance that they want that information delivered to them, and they go and re-verify that information before they put that person on the contract. I will say with one caveat: if you're NCQA accredited for doing that work as a standalone entity, you can delegate that credentialing between the payer and the hospital, in this case. And the payer will accept a list every month of newly credentialed people. But that's the exception, not the rule. And I would say the vast majority of folks are doing the process as I described earlier, right? So I think the other important financial point here is, the costs. The costs, from a labor perspective, are one thing to consider. To me, the glaring opportunity for improvement is on forfeited revenues, right? So if you've got an organization that's hiring say an anesthesiologist or a cardiologist, and they're desperately needed in that organization to just meet demand and support their community where they're working. If it's taking 4 to 6 months to get that person appointed and enrolled with payer so that they can actually perform care, every day that practitioner is waiting for that process to play out has on an average of $7,500 of forfeited net revenue. So that's about $150,000 a month to an organization that they're just walking away from, forfeiting for waiting for this process to play out. So I think there is significant opportunity for improvement, and in today's healthcare economy, every CEO and CFO of a hospital should be looking at those metrics to say, if it's taking 4 months for us to get this done, which is on the good side, and we can reduce it by 1 month, that's a $150,000 return on investment for every new practitioner we hire every calendar year. So, it's significant.
Yeah, absolutely, Anthony. And I think we've laid out the case of how much friction there is in this process. Professional credentialing has got to be done. It probably is essentially being done the same way now as it was 50 years ago, except maybe there's some emails and stuff like that, as opposed to all phone calls or whatever. But essentially the process is the same. So this is an area that is ripe for disruption. And so it was pretty exciting for me to talk to you at HIMSS and see the work you're doing to really totally upend this. So that brings us to the disruptive aspects, in this case, of what you're doing with blockchain. So let me know how you're going to fix this.
Absolutely. Well, there's 3 facets to this problem that we needed to fix. And just from a background perspective, myself and my colleagues over the course of the last 18 or so years, 17 or so years, have built and developed a number of custom credentialing and privileging management software products, mostly custom for specific clients. But we had our own BPO business at one point, working with the military, where we needed to refresh our technology that we were using internally to do the credentialing work for them. And we spent about 6 or 12 months looking at this problem and trying to figure out, why is this so hard, A, and why is the technology that's in the marketplace struggling with this as an industrial level solution, right? And it came down to the data. The credentials data set as a whole is very complicated. Anything can be considered to be a quote-unquote credential, whether it's your driver's license, a passport, a transcript from a university, a transcript from or a letter from a residency program. I could name 1,000 different things like this that someone may require for their organization's credentials package. So what we had to do was really look at this data set and engineer a data management infrastructure that accommodated the highly unstructured, way that this data, is organized in the industry, which we did. And then, it was a combination of NoSQL and SQL stuff with some nice performance cache, stuff built in between all that. And we built a very nice, very, very high performance, data processing tool to get at the data. The second part of the problem was the analysis. And what happens today is a very experienced, very competent credentialing let's call it like a senior credentialing person or specialist, takes this stack of information that they gather and verify, and then they go through it and they try to assimilate, do the different data points reflected in this data set make sense? Do they correlate? Does the employment history and the licensing history and the residential history and the the performance history all line up over this person's, let's say, 28-year career? Do the medical schools and the fellowships and the residency programs that this person went to 25 years ago, were they accredited at the time the person went through them? If the person is a foreign medical graduate, which I think is about 40% of all physicians in the U.S. today, all the information about that foreign medical education and coming, bringing that to the U.S. and getting it through the process here, so, it's a big body of work, right? So, analyzing all of that information and making sense of it takes a very experienced senior level person who can comb through it and make sense of it all before it even starts its review process, right? So we used some AI infrastructure to look at that data that we now are collecting and try to at least make a first and second pass at that information and flag anything that we felt was odd, confirm that all the things that they needed to be collected in the first place were there and present, and any other kind of things that we had learned electronically or what have you about that data, and make sure that the physical reviewers were aware of anything. The third piece was blockchain. And I came to understanding blockchain and its applicability to this use case last year. I read a white paper that was published by Intel by Dr. John Sotos, who's the chief medical officer there. And he outlined, the same things I've discussed in this call already about the problem set, and noted that blockchain would be an ideal technology for providing the trust that is lacking in the industry today regarding sharing of information. So blockchain gives us a very efficient trust layer in this overall platform. And what I mean by that is, if I'm a hospital in South Dakota and I'm hiring somebody who's moving from Pennsylvania, I know that the information that I'm seeing on that's maybe being electronically sent to me, or that I've sourced from the Pennsylvania Medical Licensing Board or what have you, is legitimate and it's accurate, and it has never changed. And this, and essentially what we're hoping to do with all of this is slowly but surely, frankly, more quickly than surely, is get through this paradigm that exists about I need to pick up the phone and call somebody to verify that the email that I received or the letter that I've received or what have you is in fact from the person who said they sent it. And if we can create a platform infrastructure that allows people to exchange this information by and between each other, by and between these counterparties, and the receiving party knows that this information is in fact accurate, untouched, and that it came from organization XYZ, managed by person ABC, then that creates what we think is the giant missing piece today in the industry, to start to move away from this, 1950s paper shuffle that we have in place.
Well, to me, Anthony, the idea that perhaps the provider is on staff at a hospital and all the credentials have been checked, and then maybe they move to another state, and those same credentials that have already been checked and verified, that's going to have to happen again. That just doesn't make any sense, whatsoever.
It does. Well, it does if you don't know if you're just given a stack of photocopied documents, right? And that's all you've got to go with. But if you can acquire this stuff electronically, then you know where it's coming from, right? So
exactly.
So,
and so what you're talking about really at the minute level, once it is pick one data element, once it's been documented a certain provider graduated from medical school at such and such a date, once that is verified and validated, and it's put on a blockchain where it cannot be modified, that never has to be checked again. It just has to be viewed at the blockchain. So, to me, that is really revolutionary because it takes out so much of the work and so much of the effort. Now, of course, it would be great if all this data that currently exists, or every nursing school or medical practice or internship or whatever, would publish their information on an ongoing basis on a public blockchain. But it's probably going to be a while before they do that. So it's kind of like the chicken and egg a little bit. How can we start getting that information out there? Because there are these different business models and proprietary data, and one hospital may not trust what another hospital is doing. How do we start getting that data on the blockchain?
Well, I guess the good, if you want to call it that, part of this process regarding adoption is the fact that this must be performed every 2 years for a practitioner in a hospital and every 3 years for a payer. So if you're delivering care, no matter if you're an outpatient clinic or you're, urgent care or a hospital or whatever, you have to re-credential your practitioners every 2 years, and again every 3 years for health insurance.
And, I didn't know that, Anthony. I had no idea of that. Oh my God.
And this is really important, right? So let me just give you some insight to this. The reason why that has to happen is because in the old days, where paper was the only source of information that you had, it was so painful to go through this process that everyone agreed that, we have to manage the ongoing clinical competency of a healthcare practitioner, whether they're a nurse or a doctor or what have you, right? And we need to relook and do a sort of a thorough re-verification of someone's competency at some time, on some timetable, I should say. And the 2-year re-credentialing process, was the way that they managed this. And there's interim stuff that gets done, that you can go verify, like a license has been renewed and all this, but sort of taking a top to bottom review of someone's credentials really only takes place once every 2 years in the paper world, right? And there's some great automation out there that's trying to move a lot of that process forward for clients who are using newer versions of technology. But the vast, vast, vast majority of the marketplace still exists in this biennial recertification, model, right? So why that's important is because there's an incentive to try and make this better, right? And because folks are have to do this work, and if we can create the right incentives to get folks to put their stuff on our exchange, and also give themselves the ability to acquire stuff on the exchange from other parties, specifically in regional markets, we believe that will be the impetus to driving an early adoption and then also long-term adoption.
Anthony, I know that your organization, the Professional Credentialing Exchange, you have some association with an organization or a company called Hashed Health. Tell me about that connection.
So, Professional Credentials Exchange is a joint venture between Hashed Health and myself. And, Hashed Health is internationally recognized as the industry leaders on leveraging blockchain for enterprise healthcare solutions. And I had the great opportunity to be introduced to those folks back at a conference in Nashville shortly after my initial meetings with Dr. Sotos at Intel. And, we put our heads together and all agreed that this use case, this credentialing use case, is probably the ideal use case for introducing enterprise blockchain solutions into healthcare. So, go ahead, Jim. I'm sorry.
Well, and so your application, is this in beta? Has it launched? Is it commercially available? What's the status?
So we have developed the work I mentioned earlier with regard to the data model and the initial sort of AI infrastructure, as well as a suite of apps which we were previously using to support some of our military clients. We are integrating the blockchain and the exchange features into that infrastructure now, and are looking to start a fairly substantive pilot here, just a little later in the year.
That's fantastic. Let's take a couple of steps back in the last 3 or 4 minutes here. We know there are a lot of appropriate and looking like quite a few inappropriate uses for blockchain healthcare. Your application looks like almost a perfect application, makes total sense. We're seeing a lot of inappropriate uses of blockchain healthcare. Any in particular that you see out there? I mean, blockchain is not a database. It's a list or a transaction or whatever. And so do you see any potential pitfalls out there, people trying to use blockchain where it's not appropriate?
Absolutely. I mean, you touched on something right there. And for the record, for your listeners, perspective, there's a ton of noise out there right now around this technology. And at its heart, it is a trusted ledger. It is a way of recording transactions and knowing that the details of those transactions have never been changed, right? So, we've seen examples of folks wanting to put data into the blockchain. And by data, I mean, let's use a credentialing use case. It's a very data-intensive process. Lots of document images, lots of data, lots of information around, personnel demographics and so forth. And trying to manage that data in a blockchain is totally inappropriate. The other thing that I think folks are coming to realize is closed networks. Right? So if you are building a solution and using blockchain to manage something that's, let's say it's underneath one company's umbrella or within, a very closed industrial network, that's just not a good use case for a blockchain. There are two types. There's public and permissioned. Right? Public means something that's being used for Bitcoin, and permissioned, which is very much like what we are building, where we've got an existing huge network of organizations that are all disparate, but need to have access and need to be securitized, in the network infrastructure to have appropriate access to the data that's out there. Right?
Absolutely. Well, Anthony, we're running out of time, and let me just say, if anybody wants to get in touch with Anthony, just Google the Professional Credentials Exchange, and you can find Anthony. I want to thank everyone for joining me on this episode of the Tate Chronicles, and I offer a special salute to my guest, Anthony Begando of the Professional Credentials Exchange. You can find more information on this show's program page at healthcarenowradio.com. Until we meet again, here's wishing you smooth sailing and safe harbors.